Printed Voice presents its inaugural edition, Stanley Elkin's story, The Guest, read by the author.
On Sunday, Bertie walked into an apartment building in St. Louis, a city where in the past he had changed trains, waited for buses, or thought about class, and where, more recently, truckers dropped him, or traveling salesmen stopped their Pontiacs downtown just long enough for him to reach into the back seat for his trumpet case and get out. In the hallway, he stood before the brass mailboxed wall, seeking the name of his friend. His friend's friend, really. And his friend's friend's wife. The girl had danced with him at parties in the college town, and one night he imagined he must have been particularly pathetic, engagingly pathetic. She had kissed him. The man, of course, patronized him, asked him questions that would have been more vicious had they been less naive. He remembered he rather enjoyed making his long, patient answers. Condescension always brought the truth out of him. It was more appealing than indifference, at least, and more necessary now. He supposed he didn't care for either of them, but he couldn't go further. He had to rest, or he would die. He found the name on the mailbox, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Preminger. The girl's identity, as he might have guessed, swallowed up in the husband's. It was no way to treat women, he thought gallantly. He started up the stairs. Turning the corner at the second landing, he saw a man moving cautiously downward, burdened by boxes and suitcases and loose bags. Only as they passed each other did Bertie, through a momentary clearing in the boxes, recognize Richard Preminger. Old man! Old man!" Bertie said. "Just a minute," Preminger said, forcing a package aside with his chin. Bertie stood, half a staircase above him, leaning against the wall. He grinned in the shadows, conscious of his ridiculous fedora, his eye patch, rakishly black against the soft whiteness of his face. Black-suited, tiny, white-fleshed, he posed above Preminger, dapper as a scholarly waiter in a restaurant. He waited until he was recognized. "Bertie? Bertie? Let me get rid of this stuff. Give me a hand, will you?" Preminger said. "Sure," Bertie said. "It's on my family crest, one hand washing the other. Here, wait a minute." He passed Preminger on the stairs and held the door for him. He followed him outside. Take the key from my pocket, Bertie, and open the trunk. It's the blue convertible." Bertie put his hand in Preminger's pocket. "You got nice thighs," he said. To irritate Preminger, he pretended to try to force the house key into the trunk lock. Preminger stood impatiently behind him, balancing his heavy burdens. "I've been to Dallas, lived in a palace," Bertie said over his shoulder. "There's this great Eskimo who blows down there. Would you believe he's cut the best side ever recorded of Mood Indigo?" Bertie shook the key ring as if it were a castanet. Preminger dumped his load on the hood of the car and took the keys from Bertie. He opened the trunk and started to throw things into it. "Going somewhere?" Bertie asked. "Vacation," Preminger said. "Oh," Bertie said. Preminger looked toward the apartment house. "I've got to go up for another suitcase, Bertie." "Sure," Bertie said. He went up the stairs behind Preminger. About halfway up, he stopped to catch his breath. Preminger watched him curiously. He pounded his chest with his tiny fist and grinned weakly. "Mea culpa," he said. "Mea booze, mea sluts, mea pot. Io mea." "Come on," Preminger said. They went inside, and Bertie heard a toilet flushing. Through a hall, through an open door, he saw Norma, Preminger's wife, staring absently into the bowl. "If she moves them now, you won't have to stop at God knows what kind of place along the road," Bertie said brightly. Norma lifted a big suitcase easily in her big hands and came into the living room. She stopped when she saw Bertie. "Bertie! Richard, it's Bertie!" "We bumped into each other in the hall," Preminger said. Bertie watched the two of them look at each other. "You sure picked a time to come visiting, Bertie," Preminger said. We're leaving on vacation, Bertie, Norma said. We're going up to New England for a couple of weeks, Preminger told him. We can chat for a little with Bertie, can't we, Richard, before we go? Yeah, of course, Preminger said. He sat down and pulled the suitcase next to him. It's very lovely in New England. Bertie sat down and crossed his legs. I don't get up there very regularly myself, not my territory. I found that when a man makes it in the Ivy League, he tends to forget about old Bertie, he said sadly. What are you doing in St. Louis, Bertie? Preminger's wife asked him. It's my Midwestern swing, Bertie said. I've been down south on the southern sponge, opened up a whole new territory down there. He heard himself cackle. Who did you see, Bertie? Norma asked him. You wouldn't know her, a cousin of Claff's. Were you living with her? Preminger asked. Bertie shook his finger at him. The Premingers stared glumly at each other. Richard rubbed the plastic suitcase handle. In a moment, Bertie thought, he would probably say, Gosh, Bertie, you should have written. You should have let us know. He should have written. Did the Fuller Brush man write? Who would be home? Who wouldn't be on vacation? They were commandos, the Fuller Brush man and he. He was tired, sick. He couldn't move on today. Would they kill him because of their lousy vacation? Meanwhile, the Premingers weren't saying anything. They stared at each other openly, their large eyes and their large heads on their large necks largely. He thought he would wait them out. It was what he should do. It should have been the easiest thing in the world to wait out the Premingers, to stare them down. Who was he kidding? It wasn't his forte. He had no forte. That was his forte. He could already hear himself begin to speak. Oh, sure, he said. I almost married that girl. Class lady cousin. The first thing she ever said to me was, Bertie, they never build drugstores in the middle of the block. Always on corners. It was the truth. Well, I thought, this was the woman for me. One time she came out of a ladies' john in a Greyhound bus station and she said, Bertie, have you ever noticed how public toilets often smell like bubble gum? That's what it was like all the time. She had all these institutional insights. I was sure we could make it together. It didn't work out. He sighed. Preminger stared at him, but Norma was beginning to soften. He wondered randomly what she would be like in bed. He looked coolly at her long legs, her wide shoulders, like Claff's cousin, institutional. Bertie, how are your eyes now? She asked. Oh, he said, still seeing double. He smiled. 2 for 1. It's all right when there's something to look at. Other times I use the patch. Norma seemed sad. Oh, I have fun with it, he said. Doesn't make any difference which eye I cover. I'm ambidextrous. He pulled the black elastic band from his forehead. Instantly, there were 2 large Richards, 2 large Normas, the 4 Premingers like a troupe of Jewish acrobats. He felt surrounded. In the 2 living rooms, his 4 hands fumbled with the 2 patches. He felt sick to his stomach. He closed one eye and hastily replaced the patch. I shouldn't try that on an empty stomach, he said. Preminger watched him narrowly. Gee, Bertie, maybe we could drop you someplace. It was out of the question. He couldn't get into a car again. Do you go through Minneapolis, Minnesota? He asked indifferently. Preminger looked confused, and Bertie liked him for a moment. We were going to catch the turnpike up around Chicago, Bertie. Oh, Chicago, Bertie said. I can't go back to Chicago yet. Preminger nodded. Don't you know anybody else in St. Louis? Norma asked. Claff used to live across the river, but he's gone, Bertie said. Look, Bertie, Preminger said. I'm fagged, Bertie said hopelessly. Locked out. Bertie, Preminger said, do you need any money? I could let you have $20. Bertie put his hand out mechanically. This is stupid, Norma said suddenly. Stay here. Oh, well. No, I mean it. Stay here. We'll be gone for 2 weeks. What difference does it make? Preminger looked at his wife for a moment and shrugged. Sure, he said, there's no reason you couldn't stay here. As a matter of fact, you'd be doing us a favor. I forgot to cancel the newspaper, the milk. You'd keep the burglars off. They don't bother a place if it looks lived in. He put $20 on the coffee table. There might be something you need, he explained. Bertie looked carefully at them both. They seemed to mean it. Preminger and his wife grinned at him steadily, relieved at how easily they had come off. He enjoyed the idea himself. At last he had a real patron, a real matron. Okay, he said. Then it's settled, Preminger said, rising. It's all right, Bertie asked. Certainly it's all right, Preminger said. What harm could you do? Yeah, I'm harmless, Bertie said. Preminger picked up the suitcase and led his wife toward the door. Have a good time, Bertie said, following them. I'll watch things for you. Preminger waved back at him as he went down the stairs. Hey, Bertie called, leaning over the banister. Did I tell you about that crazy Claff? You know what Nutty Claff did out at UCLA? He became a second-story man. They were already down the stairs. Bertie pressed his back against the door and turned his head slowly across his left shoulder. He imagined himself photographed from underneath. Odd man in, he thought. He bounded into the center of the living room. I'll bet there's a lease, he thought. I'll bet there's a regular goddamn lease goes with this place. He considered this respectfully, a little awed. He couldn't remember ever having been in a place where the tenants actually had to sign a lease. In the dining room, he turned on the chandelier lights. Sure, there's a lease. There's a lease, Bertie said. He hugged himself. How the fallen are mighty, he said. In the living room, he lay down on the couch without taking off his shoes. He sat up and pulled them off, but when he lay down again, he was uneasy. He had gotten out of the habit, living the way he did, of sleeping without shoes. In his friends' leaseless basements, the nights were cold and he wore them for warmth. He put the shoes on again, but found that he wasn't tired anymore. It was a fact that dependence gave him energy. He was never so alert as when people did him favors. It was having to be on your own that made you tired. Certainly, Bertie said to the committee. It's scientific. We've suspected it for years, but until our researchers divided up the town of Bloomington, Indiana, we had no proof. What our people found in that community was that the orphans and bastards were sleepy and run down, while the housewives and people on relief were wide awake, alert, raring to go. We can't positively state the link yet, but we're fairly certain it's something to do with dependency. In league, perhaps, with a particularly virulent form of gratitude. Ahem, ahem, ahem. As he lectured the committee, he wandered around the apartment, touring from right to left. He crossed from the living room into the dining room and turned right into the kitchen, and then right again into Preminger's small study. Here's where all the magic happens, Bertie said, glancing at the contoured chair near Preminger's desk. He went back into the kitchen. Here's where all the magic happens, he said, looking at Norma's electric stove. He stepped into the dining room and continued on, passing Norma's paintings of picturesque side streets in Mexico, of picturesque side streets in Italy, of picturesque side streets in Puerto Rico, until he came to a door that led to the back sun parlor. He went through it and found himself in a room with an easel, with paints in sexy little tubes, with brushes, with palettes and turpentine and rags. Here's where all the magic happens, Bertie said, and walked around the room to another door. He opened it and was in the Preminger's master bedroom. He looked at the bed. Here's where all the magic happens, he said. Through a door at the other end of the room was another small hall. On the right was the toilet. He went in and flushed it. It was one of those toilets with instantly renewable tanks. He flushed it again and again. Only kind to have, he said out of the side of his mouth, imagining a rental agent. I mean, it's like this. Supposing the missus has diarrhea or something. You don't want to have to wait until the tank fills up. Or suppose you're sick. Or suppose you're giving a party and it's mixed company. Well, it's just corny to whistle to cover the noise. You know what I mean? It's just corny. On the other hand, you flush it once. Suppose you're not through. Then what happens? There's the damn noise after the water goes down. What have you accomplished? This way. He reached across and jiggled a little lever, and then did it a second time, a third, a fourth. This way you never have any embarrassing interim, what we in the trade call flush lag. He found the guest bedroom and knew at once that he would never sleep in it, that he would sleep in the Preminger's big bed. Nice place you got here, he said, when he had finished the tour. Doing the war, it is all I think of, what I'm fighting for, the man from the underground said. Here is it fireproof, air conditioning, and safe from Nazis. Stay out of Volkswagens, kid, Bertie said. He went back into the living room. He wanted music, but it was a cardinal principle with him, never to blow alone. He would drink alone, take drugs alone, but somehow for him the depths of depravity were represented by having to play jazz alone. He had a vision of himself in a cheap hotel room, sitting on the edge of an iron bedstead. Crumpled packages of cigarettes were scattered throughout the room. Bottles of gin were on top of the Gideon Bible, the Western Union blanks. His trumpet was in his lap. Perfect, Bertie said. Norma Preminger could paint it in a picture.